I'm sad because my bangs are at that like awkward length where they're not really bangs anymore. They're just kind of like wings. There's not really much you can do without them hitting you in the eye, so I have to do this, but fear not, within the month, the bangs will be back. Hey guys, it's Ashley, and it is officially February, which means I get to talk about all of the books that I read in January now. So let's get started. I told myself at the end of last year that I was going to start actually like taking notes for every book that I read so that I didn't forget what I was going to say in any of these videos, or I could make more book talks and I could make these wrap-ups. I didn't follow through on that, so we're gonna do the best that I can. So the first book that I read in January, I read for my 24-hour readathon that I did to ring in the new year, and that was Starsight by Brandon Sanderson, which is book 2 in the Skyward series. I've talked about this so many times on my channel in the past month, I'm not going to reiterate much. I'm going to say that I did think that this was a 5-star book, just as the same as the first. I do think between the first and the second, I preferred the first a little bit more, but this one was really, really good because you got to see more of the worlds that Sanderson is building in this sci-fi book. Yes, like I said, this is a sci-fi. If you didn't know, we follow Spensa, who wants to be a pilot, and they're living on this planet in space, and it's great. If you want to know more, I did put a book talk up for this month, so I will leave that link down below if you want more. But all I'm going to say for this is that I know some people that I had spoken to did not like this one as much, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought that the story opened up a lot more than it had. I really like the direction that it's going in, especially with one of the like side characters who was like a main character in the first one, but now he's kind of like off to the side, if you know what I'm talking about. I'm excited for it. I'm extremely excited for book 3 because this book left off on a massive cliffhanger and I need to know what's going to happen. But then I realized that book 3 I don't think is going to come out until like 2021 because Sanderson has got so many other things that he's working on. So I'm really sad, but I'm really excited that as soon as that day comes, I'm going to grab it and devour it and read it whole because it's so good. So I really want to make it a mission to read as many new books as I can this year and not just reread the same old favorites that I have, but I could not stop myself from picking up this book because I was already in the middle of rereading the series and I needed to finish it off because it had been a really long time since I'd read this book, and that is A Conjuring of Light by V.E. Schwab. You all know how much I absolutely adore this series. It is one of my favorites, if not my favorite series of all time. So I'd said in videos past that A Gathering of Shadows was my favorite book of the series, but after rereading the entire series a couple of years later, I realized that that is not true anymore. I don't know how I would officially rank the books, but I will say that A Conjuring of Light is by far my favorite in the series. The way that this book just tied everything up, the way that it introduced more storylines to different characters, the way that it like brought forward characters who had been in the back in the previous books and kind of focused on them more so than our main characters. It was just like, it just made everything so well-rounded and so beautiful. There were so many parts of this book that I completely forgot about. So happy I reread this book because I love it so much. And this is one of those books that, like I was saying in the beginning, where I meant to take notes during it. Again, I meant to take notes. The first time I read this book, I meant to take notes and I didn't. The second time I started to and I forgot the rest of the way through because I was so like into what was happening. But I will make a book talk for this year. I promise you that. I promise you I will make a book talk for it. I still get comments on my Gathering of Shadows book talk that's like, but where's A Conjuring of Light? And I'm like just hiding in the corner over here behind my book because I have never made it. I think the first time that I read this book, I was so wrapped up in what was going to happen plot-wise that I didn't focus too much on what was happening character-wise and within character developments. And this is a very character-centered story. And so reading it the second time, already knowing what was going to happen, allowed me to more so focus on character development, and it really brought so much more of the story to the forefront. So highly recommend, if you haven't read it yet, take your time with it and focus on what's happening character and plot-wise. But if you've already read it and you enjoyed it but you want more, reread it and really focus on the characters because they're so, I love them so much. I love them so much. So the next book that I decided to pick up was one that I had put on my most anticipated releases list of 2020, and that was Infinity Sun by Adam Silvera. I bought this on ebook and I read it on my Kindle, and I would hold it up on my Kindle right now, but I literally don't know where my Kindle is. I can't find it, so that's fun. Let's talk about this book, because I had really high hopes and expectations for this book, and it kind of fell flat for me at times, which is why I ended up giving it a 3-star. Granted, so many people recently have been saying that 3 stars as a rating is a bad rating, and that's not what I do with a 3-star rating. So if you ever see me give something 3 stars, like this book, and my general like mindset about it, 3 stars means I enjoyed it. There were some parts that I had problems with, and I probably not reread it, but overall the book was enjoyable and I don't regret reading it in any way whatsoever. Okay. So we're on the same page here. So when I give this book a 3-star rating, I just had certain issues with it that I couldn't get past and wouldn't let me enjoy the story to its fullest. Anyway though, so Infinity Sun is exactly what I thought it was going to be about, but also exactly not what I thought it was going to be about. It's kind of hard to explain. So when I went into this, I knew the bare minimum. There were these 2 brothers who were living in this urban fantasy world. One of them doesn't care about getting powers and being super, and the other one really does. And the one who doesn't care ends up manifesting the powers, and it's kind of this like brotherly struggle sort of thing. That is what it was about, but the general idea of the story is a lot bigger than that. So there are these people with powers, and then there are also bad people with powers. And then there are mythical like beings like phoenixes and hydras and ghosts that people can kill and get powers, but that eventually kills them, or they're not like good in that sense because they didn't just like manifest the powers on their own, they had to kill something to get them. And so the whole thing is that, like I said, Emil, who is the one brother who didn't want anything to do with anything and just wanted to live his own life, manifests the powers, and Brighton, who is the dreamer brother who wanted this his whole entire life, has to struggle with the fact that his brother, who doesn't want it, ends up having it, and he's kind of jealous of him, but they both have to try to save the world and, you know, work out this struggle on their own. There's a lot of different layers to this story, and I did enjoy it for the most part. I did like, at times, the brotherly relationship that they had. Emil was definitely one of my favorites in this story. There were times that all of these characters annoyed me. Like, there were definitely times. Emil was way too naive and too forgiving. Brighton is too, like, much. If that's a good way to put it. There was like Maribel or Mirabella or whatever her name was, and there were a couple of other people who just like I felt like their characters were not as fully developed as Emil, maybe, or even as Brighton. Especially because I wasn't expecting this book to swap between more than the brothers' point of views, but it did. There were times when we would go from like a Brighton point of view all of a sudden into a Mirabel point of view, and I literally didn't know who Mirabel was. I was like, who is this person that we're being introduced to halfway through the story that gets a point of view all of a sudden? There was one time when we were swapping between like Emil's point of view, and then we would go into a chapter about Ness, and I literally had never heard of Ness until 3/4 of the way through the story. So there were times when I was very confused with that, but for the most part, the biggest like hurdle that I had to jump over was the actual world building. I wasn't expecting it to have so many pop culture references, and that immediately in my head is something that I don't necessarily enjoy reading in a book as much, especially a book with fantasy elements in it. While I do understand this is urban fantasy, referencing things in like pop culture just kind of dates a book for me, and I can't lose myself in the fantasy quality. So one of the biggest parts of this book was Brighton's YouTube channel. The YouTube channel was such a big part of this book, even when they were with the good people with powers and they were trying to fight the bad guys. There were so many references of like Brighton filming things and putting it on the channel, and it's gonna get so many views, and then they're doing interviews about their lives on the channel, and then all of this stuff. There were a lot of references to like Instagram and different things, and I just like, it kind of brought me out of the fantasy element of the story. Like I said, this is urban fantasy, so part of it is like real world, part of it is fantasy. So I'm not expecting that to completely go away by any means. It's just a personal preference of mine. If I get like, you know, I'm reading about phoenixes and people with powers, and all of a sudden like somebody's on Instagram looking at influencers, I'm like, what am I reading here? So, like I said, personal preference of mine. So it's not a bad reading by any means. I just had some issues with it and I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. But overall, I did like some of it and I don't know if I would pick up a sequel. I don't know. It would depend on when the time would come. So after I read Infinity Sun, I started reading Little Fires Everywhere with my mom because we were buddy reading it this month, and she is a very slow reader, and I was not expecting this. So I needed something to occupy my time because I had already read half the book and she was only a quarter of the way done. So my friend, who is now in Orlando, but she wanted to read a series with me. She was the one who I had read Truly Devious with, and she really enjoyed it and wanted to read something else with me. And she, for whatever reason, picked A Court of Thorns and Roses. I decided, yeah, it's been a while since I've read this book. I'll read it with you. Well, like I said, she's in Orlando now. She just moved up there for the Disney College program, and I knew that she wasn't gonna have the time to read, and I was impatient, and I read this whole thing in one day without telling her. So, Anna, if you're watching, I'm sorry. Like I said, I wasn't really expecting to reread this book, let alone this entire series this month, and I did reread the whole series, just wait. Actually, this is good timing too, because Sarah J Maas just posted on her Instagram that they're all getting new covers because the new book in this world about Nesta is coming out in 2021. So like, I am already on the bandwagon, already have them reread fresh in my mind. I'm ready for 2021. If you don't know about A Court of Thorns and Roses, I don't know why you wouldn't, because this series has been everywhere on BookTube since it came out years ago, but I'll give you a really brief rundown. We follow this girl named Feyre whose family is starving and it's winter and she goes hunting, and one day she spots a doe, but a wolf is about to get it, so she shoots the wolf, and then it turns out the wolf is a fairy, and then the fairies have to come down from Brithian to grab her and bring her back, but in reality she's really brought back to fall in love with this guy to break a spell, because this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And that's where we are. The series as a whole is actually really good. A Court of Mist and Fury is obviously the best one, at least to me, and I'm sure to many other people, but this first one was not honestly bad. Like, I did enjoy the first one, and the second one, like I said, is my favorite. The third one is where I start to have some issues with. It just takes a lot of willpower to get through my mate this, my mate that, I said it through the bond, that kind of thing. But yeah, I know people love this series, I know people hate this series, I know the series gets a lot of like jokes made of it because of different things, aka like a lot of the sex scenes, but it's an overall good series. I really enjoy this series. I wouldn't stop myself from rereading it again, is basically what I'm trying to say. So if you haven't read this series yet, all three of them, you should at some point. I really like them. I think they're classified as new adult though, and like I said, they do have a lot of sex scenes, so be aware, children. And so the last book that I finished this month was, as I mentioned earlier, Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. This book, I don't know what I was expecting out of this book, but it was so fucking good. It was like, I don't know, yeah. So I read this specifically because I had heard so much about this a couple years ago when it first came out, but also because my mom has been wanting to read books, and I know that she's not a huge fantasy reader. She's not gonna really be into YA as much, and so I was like trying to figure out what we could read together, because I've always wanted to expand more so into adult books, and I came across, like, you know, Reese Witherspoon's book club and stuff like that, and we've just been kind of like picking books that we want to read from there, and this was one that I had heard a lot about, so I chose this one. And we both really, really liked it. I could get my mom to come on and talk about it a little bit, but she's not here right now, so sorry. If you don't know anything about this book, we basically follow these two families that live in Shaker Heights in Ohio. Shaker Heights is basically this very perfect town. The book itself is a good commentary on what it means to be perfect, what happens when you try to be perfect, and the dangers of trying to be perfect. Not to reiterate that 3 times, but that is what it's about. It's very planned, right? All the way down to like the colors of the houses. Everything goes together. Everything is a very like utopian-esque sort of neighborhood town sort of thing. So the people therefore then try to act perfect. We follow the Richardsons, who are this wealthy family that is well established in Shaker Heights. And on the flip side of that, we follow Mia Warren and her daughter Pearl, who are moving in. They're kind of nomads. She's an artist and she kind of makes her money off of selling some of her artwork. So they end up settling in Shaker Heights and they move into this rental apartment that the Richardsons own. So the whole story is the relationships between them, the one family and the other, and how different they are, and sort of has a commentary on a lot of things. It's hard to explain. It's a really, really good, interesting book. I really loved the way that Celeste Ng writes. Her writing style just really captured me, and I think that was the thing that I loved the most about it. There were a lot of times where she would start off looking into a situation, you know, a conversation between two characters, and then would kind of write about how somebody was overhearing this conversation and what they would think about it years to come, what this conversation meant to the two of them, how their relationship would then progress over the years, you know, in the future. So-and-so would think this and would look back on it and think, you know, what could I have done differently, and would live their life completely different. She would kind of like to give you glimpses into the future while also drawing you back into the present, and I really enjoyed that. We did delve into a lot of the past. There were a lot of twists that I was not expecting in this book, which I think made it all the more better because it wasn't a very like thriller-esque book, but there were still twists and I did enjoy it for the most part. I'm really excited to read more books like this. My mom is definitely willing to read more books like this, so if you have any other books like this to read, I think we want to read Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, I think is her name. I might have that wrong, but I think that's what she wanted to read next, so I'm down for anything. But if you guys have any more recommendations, let me know. I feel like I've just been rambling about weird things for the past like 30 minutes while I've been filming this, but I hope that I put together some semblance of a review or wrap up enough for you guys to understand what I'm talking about when I talk about these books that I read. Definitely this month I am going to actually write notes on what I think so that I have a very normal speech to give you rather than this rambly one. So if you feel like it, please let me know what your favorite book that you read in January was down below. If I had to pick a favorite out of all of these, it would be extremely hard. I would probably have to say either Little Fires Everywhere because it was so different from what I normally read and I so thoroughly enjoyed it, or my reread of A Conjuring of Light. I don't normally say this in my videos, but I guess I probably should. If you guys want to like keep up with me more often, my social medias are down below, so just like check them out down there if you feel like it. I used to say that all the time, but I don't now, so I guess I should start again. But if you feel like following me on Instagram, go do it. Yeehaw. Anyway, okay, that is going to be it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you later. Goodbye!